You are about to watch a preview of a topography film, and if you would like to watch the full film and over 600 others, please head to www.topography.co.uk and become a member.
Yeah, this is Speedboat Point. Obviously, this is where I caught it from. I felt confident. You know, I was in an area that I knew had done the common at this time of the year. I was catching a few. I had a great spot out there. And I can remember he sat in my swim the one day and he was looking out at the spot. Obviously, I'd had a few good fish. And he was like, you could hook the common out there. Look at that hook hold. How lucky is that? That is literally, see that?
53 and a half.
One thing Stu did say, as I say, the week before, is if you hook that common from there, it will try and go round the island. I couldn't give it anything, I couldn't do anything. As it kited right, the bow wave that this fish pushed off its shoulders was a foot tall. It pushed a foot of water in front of it. I can't believe it.
Right, out of the way, Paul.
Big smiles, man. Literally, I don't know what to say. I can remember just clapping eyes on this fish, these fish's shoulders sat out amongst the weed. I almost knew instantly what I was looking at. Just to see that carp swimming around in that lake was an achievement in itself. Now, I'd been baiting that spot for a few weeks. I'd put a lot of effort into it, and I can remember I turned up one Friday and the weed had come up ridiculously. This was sort of almost like the final nail in the coffin. And, you know, I finally got to a point, I put a lot of effort into baiting this zone, felt like it was about to come good, and now I couldn't even get my rods on the spot. That was the start of what turned out to be an incredible run of fishing on that lake. So I actually had 21 bites over the next sort of, I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks. Massive, massive blow at the time. I was devastated to lose 2 in a trip. You know, I'd gone from a massive high of a couple of weeks before, catching those 2. I'd had a couple of weeks blank, and then the next opportunity I had 2 bites and lost them. So I went from a massive high. So after they'd spawned in pit 2, I had this idea on my mind that I needed to start introducing some bait somewhere. Now the area I had in mind for that period of the year, we're now sort of, this was end of May, start of June, and the area I had in mind was the mouth of Alsatian Bay. Now, for the previous couple of years, this whole area of the lake had been completely unfishable. It was just a football pitch of surface weed, sort of, you know, come June time, it was that weedy that you just couldn't fish that end of the lake. We could only fish from the one side, the road bank. The opposite side of the bay and round Pingewood Point was all out of bounds. So I thought that if I could get this bait in early, I could potentially create myself a presentable area. In the previous couple of years, I'd seen carp in this area at this time of year quite a lot, but as I say, it was that weedy, you just couldn't fish for them effectively. So I started baiting this swim on the road bank. Now, I baited it for probably 2 weeks, and nothing happened. But I think on my second trip fishing the spot, I clocked quite a few fish moving into the area. They were coming round the island that sits out in front of the murders. They'd swing past Pingewood Point, and then they'd head into Alsatian Bay. So this is Pingewood Point. For the first 3 seasons I fished the lake, this was all out of bounds, this whole area was. But in my last 2 seasons, I did quite a lot of time on here. It's a really good swim this time of the year, especially as they pass through to get into Alsatian. You get a lot of fish come through this water every day. And right up until my capture of the common, I was fishing and baiting out here as well as speedboat. You know, I was adamant you could get that fish from out here. You know, it's never been caught down this end, that common, but you know, I'm sure at some point there's a capture potentially to be had down here, whether it's from here or in the bay itself. As I say, it gets down here a lot. I just don't think anyone's been lucky enough to land it. There's a few stories of potential losses down this end, one of which I'll tell you about in a minute. But yeah, as I say, just no one's been lucky enough to land it, although it gets seen down here an awful lot. Right in the middle, like right in the mouth of Alsatian Bay, there's a small island. And I followed these fish and they were swimming along the island margin and then into the bay. So although I'd been baiting for a couple of weeks, I decided there and then that I'd be in a better position if I moved up the bank slightly and fished to this island. It was obviously a patrol route. So the swim I chose, the island was directly in front of me, and in the island margin, there was a couple of little, carpy looking holes, shall we say. The idea, basically I fished 2 rigs into these holes on the patrol route where I'd seen the carp swimming along the island. The third rod, I wasn't overly sure what to do with it, but I decided to chuck it off the left-hand side of the island, which was just into the bay, in the idea really that any fish passing either side of the island to get into the bay would intercept that rod as they sort of swung around the island. Now this area, I was getting a really good drop in this area, but not really getting a pullback. There was quite a lot of eelgrass out there at the time. I could tell there was something firm there, something hard, but it had quite a bit of eelgrass over the top. So I just flicked a choddy for a drop there, and I can remember throwing sticks 30-40 baits over the top of that rod. Now that night I actually caught 2 fish on that choddy, a lovely 30-pound original common and a 32-pound mirror. Now, there and then, I decided that the bait I had with me, which was intended for the swim that was further up the bank, so more so in the mouth of the bay, I was now going to put on this spot off the end of the island where I just had these 2 bites from. The theory being, that was obviously an area that the carp were happy to feed in. And as I say, I could tell there was something firm there, but it was just covered in a bit of weed. So anyway, I gave it 2 buckets of bait, left for a few days, came back, and again, for the first trip I fished that spot, I can remember the carp would come in. I did 3 nights and the carp would come in every morning and feed on me, but I just wouldn't get any bites. I think the problem was I was baiting with a lot of seed and that. They hadn't quite cleared it off to a point where I was happy to fish on the deck. So I was fishing these little low-lying pop-ups over the top, and it just wasn't the right presentation. They were coming in, they were feeding on the seed, and they were just ignoring the pop-up hook baits. The following week, on the other hand, the spot was noticeably cleaner. By now, I was actually feeling bare gravel. And so that week, I decided to fish bottom baits on the spot. And then pretty much from then, I started catching them pretty consistently. It was a really exciting bit of fishing, actually. Probably one of the most exciting bits of fishing I ever had on that lake. Sort of every morning around about 7:30, 8ish, as the sun would come up, the fish would come in, you could see them bow waving around the island, and you'd literally see them come off the end of the island, they'd drop down on the spot, and generally within minutes, I'd catch one. Now, over the course of a few weeks, the carp turned this spot into like an absolutely spanked golden ring. You could see it from up the tree. It had gone from a weedy area off the end of the island to this big glowing gravel patch. Looked fantastic. And as I say, I caught a few nice fish off that spot over the weeks. But towards the end of June, I'd had a run of good uns. I'd had an original common, I'd had a really rare common. It's a stocky, but at the time I thought it was a fish known as the saddleback. Transpires it wasn't. It's just another fish that looked similar to the saddleback, but didn't get caught a lot. And I can remember the one day I was sat there with an old boy, Stu. He's fished the lake for a long time. A lot of people who've had anything to do with Burghfield in the last 20 years will know who Stu is. Nobody knows Burghfield like Stu does. And I can remember he sat in my swim the one day and he was looking out at the spot. Obviously I'd had a few good fish, and he was like, "You could hook the common out there, I reckon." That's all he said. He just said, you could hook the common out there, I reckon. Now, if anyone else was saying that, I'd pay no attention. But as I say, Stu knew the lake. He knew that fish better than anybody. And when he said that, I was listening. Anyway, the following week, I came back down. I got back in that swim. It was the full moon the following morning. At this point, the common hadn't been caught for 2 years, over 2 years. Since, in fact, it was almost 2 years to the day at this point since Dave Lane had caught it. I can remember I got the rods out that night, And that morning, about 8 o'clock, a big lone fish entered the bay. I could see it at the back of the spot, this big dark hump, just in amongst the surface weed, bobbing around behind the spot. And I can remember actually thinking at the time, I thought, that looks a good fish, that does, that looks the thought even crossed my mind. I thought, that could be the common. It had been getting in the bay at that time. It was due, but I didn't think too much. I can remember just seeing this big hump behind the spot, bobbing around, lone fish, and thinking, that's a big fish. Anyway, it disappeared. And I sort of forgot about it over the next 20 minutes or so, carried on doing what I was doing. And about 20 minutes later, left-hand rod was away. I can remember picking the rod up. I was still using mono at the time. And the spot, it was only about 4.5 foot deep. And the spot just dropped as whatever I hooked bolted off the back of the spot. There was a band of surface weed at the back of the spot and it went through that surface. I mean, I'm fishing completely locked up.
Hopefully you enjoyed what you've just seen, and as I said at the start of this video, if you'd like to watch this film in its entirety, please head over to www.sapography.co.uk and join today.